Hello, welcome to another episode of Mobile Technology Spotlights, sponsored by Samsung Electronics of America and presented by Public Safety Insight. Samsung is committed to supporting public safety and helping first responders to use technology as a force multiplier. I'm Scot Haug, and today I'll be talking with Major George Perera, who has more than 30 years of experience with the Miami Dade, Florida Police Department. Major Perera is the commander of the Cybercrimes Bureau, Miami Dade Police Department. And he's with us today because he's one of the most knowledgeable and experienced cybercrimes people we know. He commands the largest cybercrimes unit in the United States, as well as a plethora of other things, does work with the International Chiefs of Police Association, serving on several committees there. And I'm so pleased to be able to have this discussion with Major Perera. So let's turn to Major Perera. Thank you so much for being with us today. As we were just preparing to start this podcast, you talked about how you just returned from Singapore and we're over there talking about cybercrimes and some of the knowledge that you have. Could you just take a minute and sort of give us an update on that trip?
Sure. Good morning, Scott. Thanks for inviting me to speak with you. So I just got back from Singapore. I gave a talk there at a cybercrime conference that they have for all of the countries in the area there. It's hosted by the Singapore Police Force. And the topic of that particular conversation was the use of these generative AI models in furtherance of cybercrime. So cutting edge kind of technology used by criminals to further their tradecraft. And it was a very good discussion. I kind of got into that area going back into the first part of this year. I want to say probably around March, I think, was my first brush where we had a manufactured video that was done with one of these AI models. And it involved an extortion case. And the victim was actually a police sergeant. The video depicted a sex act between this police sergeant and a minor. So it was a very serious charge, very serious situation. And it does not work for, our agency. He works for another agency here. He didn't know where to go, what to do. And somebody said, hey, why don't you talk to the cybercrimes folks over Miami-Dade? They've got a pretty robust organization over there. Maybe they can help you out. So, he came over and we were able to debunk it. And we're still in the process of trying to identify the perpetrators of the extortion. But the most important thing was that we were able to debunk that this was, in fact, a not legitimate video. We even went to the extent of making contact with the state attorney's office to ensure that they would not file charges against him or anything like that. And that was his primary concern. So that was our first time that we kind of got to see how some of this stuff was being used. And then I began my journey into understanding this and the different processes and how we have to react investigatively to address this stuff, because this is going to be a big, big problem for law enforcement moving forward on a whole lot of different levels.
I mean, that's so concerning. I can't imagine something like that happening. Where do you turn when something like that happens? I want to transition just real quick. Why Miami-Dade PD and what's your role been with that? Why do you guys have the largest one in the country? I know you're a large agency, but why Miami, Florida?
I've been involved in law enforcement technology for probably more than half of my career. Cyber and the effects of cyber crimes continue to grow. And there was some research that I saw recently. I want to say it was done by a big thing. It was like NIST or maybe RAND or something. They were saying that more than 95% of all crimes that are committed today have a digital component to it. There's digital evidence or some type of a cyber crime or cyber-enabled crime or some facsimile thereof. And law enforcement is historically very reactionary, and we oftentimes are playing catch up. So as far back as 2010, I started advocating for a cybercrimes unit. It was in 2019, I was given the green light to go ahead and start putting this together. And I think everybody can appreciate how much time it takes to create a new unit from scratch. There was a lot of planning that goes into that before we actually have our first people that are being assigned. We're going into our third year now of existence. The way that I was able to create this unit was to show the need to my bosses. So I created basically a business plan where I looked at statistical information on people who were looking for assistance with some type of cyber fraud or cyber enabled fraud or other type of scam involving the computers. I pulled statistics from IC3. I pulled statistics from our own organization, got a year's worth of stats, and showed that there were almost 2,000 cases here in Miami-Dade County that nobody investigated because there wasn't an entity here. The only people that were doing any type of investigations into these cases was the FBI and the Secret Service, and HSI was playing in the space a little bit. But the reality is you have a squad of 2 people at the FBI, you have 4 people at the Secret Service, and maybe a couple, 2 or 3 at HSI. So you have a grand total of, half a dozen people maybe. And that's not just Miami-Dade County, because you know how the feds are. That's like from Orlando down to Key West. So a massive area, massive amount. And I didn't even look at statistics for the whole area. I was just looking at Miami-Dade County. So I presented it to my management and explained to them all of this dynamics. And they said, no, yeah, execute. So that's what we did. And we partnered with the Secret Service, and we actually work out of their offices. All of my investigators are dual sworn. I have a staff of, I think, 54 right now. And from MDPD, that's just MDPD's commitment to the thing. I have from the Secret Service 2 supervisors and 2 squads. So they have given me 2 full squads. So I have about 14 plus 2 supervisors from the Secret Service. And then the task force is opened up to all the other state and locals in the area here. So we have more than 100 people involved in the task.
It's interesting because you talk about 2,000 cases. What I found in my experience, in my time in law enforcement, is that's a fraction of the people that are actually reporting being a victim. So many times, there's so many people out there, elderly or otherwise, that are victims of these crimes that don't report them because they know that not much is going to happen with them. So I'm sure those numbers are probably staggering if we really knew how large they were.
It's significant. I can tell you that our statistics is more than that now. We've recovered millions of dollars for people in some of these scams that have been going on, and with cryptocurrency and those kinds of things. But another big component that we've done is we do a lot of PSAs with the local media and news companies, where we will come out and shoot a thing about trends that we see. And if we can get in front of a trend, and educate the public, then maybe we might not have as many victims that way. We are very proactive when it comes to those kinds of things as well.
And that's a great segue into the next question that I had for you is, you're commanding one of the largest cybercrimes task force in the United States. What are some of the major trends that you're seeing out there? What's happening today?
Probably the number one thing that we see out there is this thing called pig butchering. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. It's a term that was coined in Southeast Asia. You fatten up the pig and then you take it to slaughter, kind of a deal. The thought process is that in a lot of these countries, the Philippines, Cambodia, Malaysia, and some of the other Southeast Asia countries, as well as India, you see it also in Africa and some countries in Africa. They've actually made a business of doing this cyber scam frauds or pig butchering cases. What they do basically is it's a scam where they get you to invest money, or a romance scam, or some facsimile thereof of these things. They get you to take your cash out of your bank account and then convert it into cryptocurrency and then send it to them for these, according to them, massive exponential increases in value for cryptocurrency investments. Or it's a typical kind of a one of these romance deals, and it could be either men or women. Those are probably the largest thing, preying primarily on elderly people. We also are seeing an uptick in the grandparent kind of cases, where they'll call up and say, oh, I've got Jimmy here. If you want to see Jimmy alive, you're a grandkid, you got to give us $5,000 or something. And that type of situation is getting more believable to the grandparents now with the use of some of these generative AIs, especially the ones for voice, because they get a kid's voice and play it onto the, help me, grandma, please send the money to them so I can get out of here. and then the grandparent is sending the money. We actually have footage of a grandmother going to a Bitcoin ATM, pumping money into the Bitcoin ATM. It really is crazy. And then we try to work with these internet companies, Facebook, Google, all of these different companies in order to pursue the investigations. And a lot of times these companies they stonewall you or make the process very, very difficult, to provide you with the records that you need to further the investigation. So it can be very, very sad and difficult, but, you got to fight the good fight.
You mentioned AI. That's sort of the hot discussion right now, where these crooks are using AI to do a variety of different things. Could you take just a little bit of time and talk about what you're seeing with AI technology? I mean, it can do some wonderful things from the positive side, but what are you seeing from the criminal side, the dark side, if you will?
That is a discussion we could go on for hours. But in a nutshell, like I mentioned earlier, that my first blush with it was the first part of the year where we saw what I would call a primitive AI engine that creates video used for this purpose of extortion. Since that time, the AI engines have gotten significantly better. Now it's a lot more difficult for us to investigate the cases. Where I see AI and criminal usage clearly is in that space there where you're going to see these type of deep fakes or fake videos that are synthetic content created by, a generative AI model. We're going to have to investigate those. Additionally, the voice, is another big thing where now you can impersonate somebody or have somebody impersonated. And these are big things. These two are probably the biggest two things that I see that could be very impactful coming up in the next year, because we're in an election cycle. And I think you're going to see usage of that stuff is going to be huge. And I'm not the only canary in the coal mine here. The Bureau has also put out a lot of information. There was multiple press releases from them sounding the alarm on this particular stuff as well. So this is going to be very, very problematic for elected officials, not just presidential. I'm talking about even local elected officials. Like I said, the technology is getting perfected to the point where you really, really got to be a skilled investigator to be able to identify things that are indicative of this content being synthetic. But you cannot say 100% that it is. It's going to get very, very tricky. We're working in this space. My own unit is very intently. We have a little mini group within my task force here where we're focusing on AI, and we've actually have our own instance of an AI that we're training here to assist us with the investigations and whatnot. We're trying to use the AI against the AI because I see that as being very, very problematic and not having a lot of information to assist you, with the investigation. Then now we take it into the other areas with, our second probably highest type of crime that's committed is a business email compromise. And that's where a business email is taken over and the bad guys are directing people or staff to send money impersonating somebody high up within the company. So these generative models now are being sold as a service on the dark web, allowing the bad guys to integrate through APIs or interfaces between different systems, which will allow the generative AI model to communicate directly with whomever is within the organization, adding color to whatever they're asking them to do. It's not just a printed email on the paper now. The AI is actually responding to the email, or in some instances, interacting with the employee on the phone, telling them to complete this transaction. Now it takes, a bad guy who maybe would before be having a 40% success rate, which is still pretty good. Now it takes them up to a 90+ success rate because you have added all this additional reality to the scam. That's another thing that they're doing. So, I mean, there's so many others. They're able now to create, and they are, again, on the dark web, they have instances where you can subscribe and the AI will generate code. They're creating malware with it. Not only are they creating malware, they're taking that malware or to take another malware that they have, and they're using the AI to put what's called a wrapper around the malware that eludes intrusion detection systems or intrusion protection systems. It circumvents those cybersecurity tools that are on the network, and it allows the thing to pass through and then execute. There's so many ways that this stuff is being used. I saw and we're just talking criminal. If you want to get into terrorism, there was a thing that I read probably 2 months ago that was done at MIT where they took a group of students and they gave them a class project. They gave them 1 hour and they said to the students, and these were not techie students, these were like psychology majors or something. They said, you have 1 hour, you can use ChatGPT. What we want you to do is we want you to figure out how you would create a bioweapon, where you could get the ingredients for the bioweapon, and what's your plan for how you would execute it and do this thing. The students went out, and because you can manipulate any of these generative AIs, even the ones that allegedly have guardrails, it's just how you frame your questions. A lot of the kids already know how to do it. So you don't even really need to go to the dark web for this stuff if you know how to manipulate the normal AIs. All 5 groups were capable and able and successfully had done things from anthrax to smallpox to all of this different stuff, and had a plan baked where they would get the pieces that they would need, how it would be deployed, where they would deploy. I mean, it was a whole deal. And so you have the anarchist cookbook now right there available to your fingertips for any terrorist, which to me is mind-boggling. The thing that people need to wrap their heads around is that they talk about legislation and guardrails and trying to put these things around this stuff. Baby, the cat's out of the bag. The horse is out of the barn. I mean, whatever way you want to say, this ship has already sailed and you're not going to get it back. You cannot put it back. You can enact whatever you want to say or do or whatever, and it's only going to be the companies that are commercially available out there that potentially you're going to impact. It's not going to touch anything else. And just to give you an idea of the growth of this thing, when I first started playing with this, I told you was in the spring of this year, when the ChatGPT first surfaced. Within 4 weeks, we had our first meeting internally to talk about AI. And after that thing with that sergeant, within 4 weeks of that meeting, there were already 25 variants of these models that were out floating around, because a lot of them are open source. So people were taking them and they were changing them already and doing things with them. In another 2 months after that, when I gave my first talk at the cybercrime conference, there were already 200. There are over 40 of them right now that are exclusively for porn, for generating porn. And not just porn, but CSAM material, which is the child abuse, sexual something material. They're creating that content because 2 things. First of all, when you actually have a situation of a live video, now you can change the face of the victim, or you can change the face of the subject into something else, created content. So you're not going to be able to identify who these individuals are, but they look very much real. And so that's a wrinkle. The other thing is that if it's completely synthetically generated, the prosecutors, as it stands right now, won't prosecute because there's no victim, no crime. There's no real victim, so we don't have a crime. There is a push, though, I will say legislatively, that's going around right now for that to be a crime. If you possess that kind of stuff, it is a crime. I don't know what type of crime it's going to be, but they're trying to do that because there's so much of that material now that's starting to surface. It's really, the AI is making it the wild, wild west out there, completely different level. Like I said, the scams are going up, and we're just talking about cyber fraud or cyber enabled kind of stuff. Let's just take a step back from that and say, what about a regular crime? Let's say you want to rob a jewelry store. So I can go to chat and I can say, chat, obviously I've got to couch my questions appropriately, but I can go to chat and say, hey, I want to rob the jewelry store on the corner. I need you to create a plan for me that's going to provide me with the least possible opportunity for me to get caught. What do I need to do? Create this plan for me. And again, I'm obviously simplifying it because it is a process. Okay. But I'm telling you, it can be done. The model will tell you what day, what time, based on police calls. It will pull the schematic of the building. It will analyze all this stuff. It'll look at the alarm systems. It'll look at CCTV. It'll look at people that live in all these different kinds of factors and pull it together and give you a plan that will tell you that if you follow this to the letter, you have a 7% chance of getting caught. So now you've taken these knuckleheads, which we've always, in our line of work, we've always said our criminals aren't that smart. You know what I'm saying? Now you're giving them a recipe that they can follow, that not too smart guy that's almost going to guarantee him that he's going to be successful with whatever his enterprise is.
Wow. That's very concerning. Like I said, I see a lot of positive with AI, but you've laid out so many pitfalls of it as well. Some of our listeners, or a majority of our listeners, are mobile centric. So in a broader sense, what should our listeners be aware of as it relates to cyber crimes and smartphones? Do you have any thoughts there?
Smartphones are always a vector of entry for bad guys. I don't think a day passes where we're not seeing, some new methodology that, the bad guys are using to get a malware on a device, or some new malware that was introduced onto a device. But what makes the smartphones so dangerous is that a lot of times they roam into other networks. Depending upon the architecture and the security plan of those networks, it's very easy for things to pass between that network and your devices, especially when you're dealing with things like free Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi, and those kinds of things. I haven't seen any instances yet where, AI is doing anything with a smartphone, but I think that's just a matter of time because it's going to be another method for them to leverage as far as that goes.
Yeah, this has been a great discussion. And the last question that I have for you, you've laid out how criminals are using technology. You see it on a daily basis. You see people victimized. You see businesses victimized frequently. What recommendations do you have for agency leaders, company leaders? How do they protect themselves?
Yesterday, I participated in a call. The state of Florida had a call about AI. They don't really understand it, and they're trying to wrap their brains around it. And they had a lot of academics on the line, and they were talking about partnering with academic institutions and all of these kinds of things. And I'm set to do a presentation with those folks next month, and I'm going to try to educate them, because they need to understand is they think that they need to create a separate AI unit or hire people to just deal with AI, some kind of experts or something. And the reality is you don't, but you need to get into the cybercrime business. Most law enforcement agencies around the country, they're into digital forensics. Most of them know that you got to have some guys that are capable of downloading phones or, computers, in furtherance of an investigation. So you have digital forensics. A lot around the country have ICAC units, which deal with the child porn. What you don't have is you don't have guys that are doing the cyber investigations, that are doing, like my unit, where we do hacks, we do other types of network intrusions, we do, any type of data exfiltrations, we do business email compromises, all this whole gamut of stuff. And then we also deal with the cyber fraud cases, the pig butchering cases, all those romance scams that I was talking about, cryptocurrency, money laundering cases, and stuff on the dark web, and dealing with all that stuff. So you need to create a unit, first of all, that deals with that stuff, because that's the interim step to the AI. The AI investigations actually become a branch off of this other stuff, because your investigators have a mastery or an understanding of technological investigations. The AI is just an offshoot of that. And you don't need a special team that's going to investigate AI. What you need is a competent team that understands the cyberspace and understands cyber investigations, and they can investigate a case involving AI because they know what they're looking for in those cases. And a lot of times in these kind of investigations, it is just police work. If you're looking at that image or that video, yes, we have specific things that we're looking for. We're looking at the metadata, and we have some different applications or tools that we can use to assist us in identifying, whether this was synthetically created or not. But you also have to look at the image itself. And that doesn't require any kind of special tools or anything. It's just you as a trained observer. I read a paper that was written, I think it was an IEEE, that's the engineering peer review magazine. And it was written by some guys in a university. I forget which university it was. It was one of the larger ones. And they were doing an analysis of deep fakes and the technology that was available today to identify deep fakes. And the long and the short of the article said that the efficacy of the applications and the programs that were out, tools that are out today, runs anywhere between 60 and 70%. There's a thing, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, called a super identifier. Super identifier is somebody that can look at a picture very, very quickly, and then you can show a picture, maybe or a partial picture of the same face, and they're able to say that's the guy with a 99% probability. It's a skill that some people have and others don't. It's kind of like a sommelier has more taste buds on their tongue than a regular person does. Super identifier, looking at a deep fake, has a very high probability of being able to identify whether it's a legitimate thing or not. But law enforcement officers who are trained investigators have a higher rate than even an application at when they look at a video and they look at it and they say, or an image, and they say, something about this is just isn't right. And I don't know if that's our sixth sense, how we talk about law enforcement, we have a sixth sense. Something doesn't look right or something doesn't feel right when we walk into that office, that building, or wherever we're going. And, it ends up that something's not right there. It's the same kind of a thing. When you look at these videos, you can tell something's off. You may not be able to put your finger on what it is, but you know that something's off with it. What we're kind of doing is we're taking a look at it, and if we're saying something's off with this, then we're kicking it over to the tools and starting to put stuff through the tools so we can say, okay, here, these are things. Because, like I said, they're perfecting this technology and it's getting that much more difficult. But at the end of the day, that article that I was referring to, they said that the efficacy of the tools was, not that great, and humans by themselves is not that great. But when you combine the two things, you raise that efficacy. And that's kind of where we're going with that and how my folks are looking at that. We're combining the two things to increase that stuff. So again, it's looking at how we do regular old police work and tweaking it to address some of these concerns.
Major Perera, thank you so much. You've given us so much information to consider. It's, from my perspective, it's great to see people like you that are out there fighting the good fight, because this is getting very complex, starting to see more and more victims. And we need to have folks like you and your unit out there taking care of this. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to meet with us today and give us some of your insights.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Today's episode of Mobile Technology Spotlight was sponsored by Samsung Electronics of America and presented by Public Safety Insight. Stay safe out there.